with that, I'll hand it over to Mike to talk about breeding codes and safe dates. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Emma. Yeah, hello everybody. Pretty exciting to be here. Feels like it's been a long time coming to the start of Atlas 3. So I'm, for one, very excited now that we're here, and I hope the presentation today will help everybody make the most of their atlasing. So we're gonna focus on breeding codes and safe dates for the session right now. In terms of what I'm gonna talk about, we're gonna start with an outline on what the breeding codes are. And then, sorry, I'm trying to move my screen around. There we go. And what the different categories are, what are some resources out there for learning these codes. And then I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about breeding dates and breeding calendars, what they are and how to use them, and especially what their importance is when you're doing atlasing outside of the sort of the core atlasing season in the summertime. And we'll wrap it up with some examples and a little quiz. So, and some time for questions. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, so that should leave us 10 minutes or so for questions. So, and as Emma said, as we go, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and then we'll have a chance to go through them at the end. Okay, so in terms of an intro to breeding codes, Mike already touched on them a fair bit in his presentation, but breeding codes are the foundation for how we collect atlas data. They're really important because birds are always moving, so we need some way to assess what the evidence is that that bird is in fact a breeding bird in that particular spot where it was recorded. It gives us a lot of ability to compare between atlases here in the province, but also between different atlases going on in different provinces or states or territories. And as Mike said in his presentation, these codes follow international atlasing standards. So they're not just random things that we made up to try to confuse everybody. And one thing I do want to really emphasize is you don't need to worry about memorizing every single code right away. A lot of them, most of them are very intuitive. And if you just are paying attention to birds and then go to put things into the data entry system, you'll probably be able to figure out very quickly without even having practiced learning them. So breeding codes are grouped into 4 categories, from observed to possible to probable to confirmed. And as you go down that scale, you're increasing in confidence that the bird was actually breeding. So I'm going to go through those 4 categories with an example from each, and then we'll keep moving. So the first category is just observing a species with no breeding evidence observed. So the only code in this category is X, which means that you observe the species during its breeding season, but not in suitable nesting habitat. So you didn't find any breeding evidence. So this could be something like if you had a common loon fly over you in the middle of a giant cornfield or soybean field, and there's no body of water anywhere nearby, that's an X. The next category is probable. These are the lowest level of breeding codes. So they can be something like this American redstart singing away. That would be the S code for a singing male or adult producing other sounds associated with breeding. And this includes things like woodpeckers drumming or ruffed grouse drumming as well, things like that. So the S code is very common code. The other possible code that's out there is the H code for observed in suitable nesting habitat. Moving down further up further, the categories is probable. So this is the second level of breeding evidence. There's quite a number of different codes that fall into the probable category. This example here are some wild turkeys doing their courtship display, and the key here with this code is that you've got interaction between either male or males and females or females. So lots of different probable codes that are available to be used. And you'll, as I said at the start, you're going to get to learn these codes pretty quickly once you start doing the actual atlasing. Now, the highest level of breeding evidence is the confirmed codes. So these are things like what you see here, some great horned owl chicks sitting in their nest. So in this case, we've got nest with young, the NY code. So there's quite a few different confirmed level breeding evidence codes as well. So if you're looking to see, if you're looking to learn these codes a little bit before you start atlasing, there's some resources out there on the Atlas website under tools and resources. There's the third thing from the bottom there, the breeding evidence codes. And there's also an Atlas quiz that you can access. So if you click on the breeding evidence codes, you'll be taken to the full list of all the different codes with their definitions. As I said, it's not important to have memorized every single one of these codes before you start atlasing. You're going to get plenty of practice using these codes. And if at first you have to constantly look them up, that is no problem. You can reference the website here. You can print off this page if you like. Another option is if you're using the app, these are always available to you when you try to do the data entry. So if you click on the breeding evidence codes within the app, you can look at the codes in a grid view or a list view. The list view is really handy because it does give you the sort of short definition. And the other thing handy if you're using the app is it'll give you all these different species-specific warnings and cautions. That's what those little exclamation marks mean. And if you click on those, you'll get more details. But don't focus on that. Just focus on practicing with the codes. So I mentioned there is a breeding evidence code quiz right on the Atlas website. Very, very handy to practice using these codes. There's over 100 different sort of hypothetical scenarios. You can click on them and then it'll give you an option to choose which one you think is the correct code to use, and then it'll give you an explanation as to why that's the case. So lots of resources out there, but like I said, don't worry if you haven't memorized these at all. You'll learn them very quickly when you start actually atlasing. Okay, so I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and we're gonna start talking about breeding dates and why these are important. So the breeding dates, Mike showed this in his introductions slides. The breeding dates are out there. We have these breeding calendar that show basically when a species is around in different parts of the province, and then as well as when it's likely to be breeding, what's the sort of migration season, and what are the safe dates. So don't worry too much about that stuff right now. Just know that these exist, and I'm going to tell you more about what they mean and how to interpret them. Now, the important thing to pay attention to, though, is that little map in the bottom right of these part of the province that the particular chart you're looking at refers to. So these are broken down into 3 major ecozones in the province. So there's one for the Mixedwood Plains in southern Ontario, one for the Boreal Shield sort of through central and the little bit of northern Ontario, and then the Hudson Plains have their own breeding calendar. So when you look at a breeding calendar entry, it's divided up into the calendar year. And it shows you what the bird is up to basically at different times of the year. So the white part of the calendar is when the species is absent. So in this example, the scarlet tanager is absent from basically the start of the year to late April, and then absent again from October to December. Now the next part of the calendar is that yellow or gold portion, and that's the migration period. So the migration period is not affected for the species. Now the blue part in the sort of center is the breeding season for the species. And the part of the breeding season that overlaps with the migration season is in that light blue. And then the part of the breeding season that doesn't overlap with migration is the dark blue. And that's what we refer to as the safe dates. So the safe dates are the time of year when the species is we're expecting that species to be breeding, and it's generally safe to assume if you observe it that it would be breeding. Now, if you want to find these safe breeding dates calendars and read more about how they were developed and the sort of minutia of this stuff, it's again found on the website under tools and resources, and there's a entry called safe breeding dates. You'll end up on this page. There's a link to Appendix H, which talks all about safe dates and breeding dates. But there's also a link to download the breeding calendars for either taxonomic order or chronological order. Now, to breeding codes, there are some considerations you need to make, especially when it relates to where you are in the calendar year in terms of that particular species breeding season. So if you think back to the various breeding codes we talked about, they're going from least confident to most confident that the species is actually breeding. And some of the less confident codes, like H for habitat and S for singing bird, those are behaviors that can also be shown by migrants when they're moving through. So for those codes up at the top of this list, you have to be very cautious when you're outside of the species safe dates, because it could be just a migrant passing through your area. So in that Appendix H that talks about safe dates, we break down which codes should be used only during the safe dates, whereas which other codes should be used, can be used outside of the safe dates, but in the breeding season, as long as you sort of pay close attention and try to ensure that it is a breeding bird in fact. So the full version of this is in Appendix H, as I said. Don't worry again about memorizing this right now. Just remember that you want to, if it's a behavior like singing or breeding habitat, the S or H code especially, you want to reserve the use of those to just within the species safe dates. And of course, if you're only atlasing during the core atlasing period basically in June, then you don't really need to worry about this aspect at all. So just to try to help explain this a little further, we're going to go through some examples. And I think we have the ability to hold everybody. So the first example I want to give is this sitting on a wire. And Kaylin, I can't see the chat. I think you're there. Are we able to try this poll?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not sure if I'm a co-host right now. Do you see the polling function on your end?
Not yet. Oh, yeah. Okay, it just popped up.
I see the polling function, so I can just tell me when you're ready for me to bring that up. And oops. Okay. I can just, yeah. Is that okay?
Okay.
I think I can.
Some people.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Now, some people are already voting, but remember what we need to do. We need to check the breeding calendar first for the species. So in the case of the mourning dove, we're going to assume where today's date, and we're gonna use the breeding calendar for the mixed wood plain. So I've pulled it up here, and we're at the end of April, so we're within that dark blue period. So we're in the safe dates, so we can use any breeding evidence code we want. And so we've got some people have answered the poll. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. The options for the poll are up there. There's you can leave the code because it's breeding season, but no breeding evidence observed. You can use H for habitat or S for singing bird. Okay, 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the polling. Great, we got almost 200 votes in. Okay, so the 60% of people said H for habitat, and that is the correct answer. So we're in safe dates. The species was observed near nesting habitat, in nesting habitat. So we're good to go for using that H code for species observed in suitable nesting habitat. All right, let's try another example here. So Eastern Phoebe, singing in your backyard. what breeding evidence code would you use? So I'll bring up the safe dates, the breeding calendar, and then I'll go to the next question. Okay, here's the breeding calendar. So we are in that light blue period. So that's when the breeding season overlaps with migration season. So the poll is up. Your options are you can leave the breeding evidence code blank, you can put an X, you put an S for singing bird, or a T for territory. And just as a hint, again, we're in that light blue period, so we're not in the safe dates yet, but we are within the breeding season. This is kind of fun watching the poll numbers. All right, I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. If you haven't voted yet, just a reminder, we are in the overlap period between migration and the breeding season in that light blue. All right, 2 more seconds. All right, so this one was tricky. 40% said 3% and 22% said leave blank. So the correct answer for this one is you should leave it blank. X would be acceptable as well. So the majority of people picked one of those two. The key, as I said, is we're in that overlap period. So just because it's a singing bird, we don't know really that it's actually nesting in that area. It could just be a bird that's passing through our backyard. So we want to use caution for codes like S and H that are behaviors that can be shown by migrants when we're in that overlap period. All right, so let's try another one. This one is the yellow rumped warbler. So exact same situation as that eastern phoebe. There's a yellow rumped warbler in your backyard off your balcony, and it's been singing in your backyard for the past 7 days. Now let's check out the breeding calendar for that species. So the breeding season for this species starts kind of end of the first week of May, goes till mid-August. The safe dates are from May 24th to 31st. So we are in the migration season for yellow rumped warbler. We are not in the breeding season yet. So let's bring that one up. There we go. Okay, polling is on. And lots of results. You guys are getting faster and faster at voting. This is great. We'll give you another 15 seconds or so. So your options again are leave it blank, X for breeding season but no breeding evidence, S for singing, T for territory. The yellow rumped warbler's been there for a week singing. We are outside of the breeding season. I'm going to give you 2 more seconds. All right. Okay, I guess this one was an easier one. 80% of you said leave it blank, and that is the correct answer. So you want to leave this one blank because we're outside of the breeding season, and in which case you don't want to use any of these breeding evidence codes. All right. I'm going to go back to the phoebe, and I've tweaked this one slightly. Now, instead of just singing in your backyard, it's been singing in your backyard for a whole week. So what breeding evidence code are you going to use? I'll pull up that breeding calendar again. So we are in the overlap period. We're in that light blue. So it could be a migrant or it could be a breeding bird, but it's been there for a week and it's been singing in the same spot. So your options are, and there's the poll up, great. Your options are leave it blank. You can do X, you can do S for a singing bird, or T for territory. And just so those of you who are wondering what's the difference between S and T, T is when a bird has been maintaining a territory for at least a week. So that could be singing or other things related to defending a territory. That's my hint for you guys. We got a few more votes coming in. Give it 5 more seconds. So we're not in the safe dates, but we're within the breeding season. The bird has been present for a week, singing from the same general area. All right, there we go. Yeah. So again, this one was a trickier one, a bit more split, but the highest one, which is T for territory. So the territory breeding evidence code is one that you can use when you are outside of the safe dates, but within the breeding season. All right, last example. You find an adult horned lark feeding young in its nest. What breeding evidence code do you use? Here's your breeding calendar. So we are almost into the safe dates, not quite yet, but we are in the breeding season, but we are still in a period when migration could be going on for this species. So what breeding evidence code are you going to use? Okay, so. Okay, this one was maybe not challenging enough. We've got lots of answers in. 5 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up. So by far the majority, 80% of people said nest with young. That's the correct code to use. And obviously there's no doubt it is breeding. So you can use a code like nest with young at any time of the year. If it's outside of that breeding season, then it's good to document it well. It'd be unusual, but obviously it's breeding, so you don't need to worry about ruling out the possibility of a migrant. Okay, so those were some examples how to use safe dates along with the breeding codes. Please do refer to those date guides when you're atlasing outside of that core atlasing season. They're meant to be a guide only. There will be lots of times where things just don't quite line up, and that's fine. Keep in mind that the ecozones are very large, so there's going to be variation in the dates from whether you're at the very south part of that zone or the north. If you're reporting outside of what the date guides recommend, please include notes. And if you have suggestions for species that we should adjust, please do send us that information. All right, so that's it. We've got a few minutes still for questions, so let's move on to that.
Yeah, this is, there have been lots of questions, so I'll just start with one of the first ones from earlier in the session from Heather. So Heather was just wondering if you see a bird exhibiting breeding behavior from a short walk of like less than 1 kilometer or from your backyard window, what kind of, should someone be writing 1 kilometer or 0 kilometer when they're entering that observation?
So if you're doing if you're recording breeding and bird atlas checklist, then you want to report the effort in terms of what you were doing. So if you walked a distance away, then record and you're recording all the birds that you're seeing on that and you travel. If it's just sort of like you're just putting one record, then you don't need to put in the effort data, just enter it as an incidental checklist.
Okay. Then Leslie was wondering, with mourning doves, is the coo call breeding evidence like a singing bird? Does that
yeah, that's a singing bird for sure.
Okay. So Emily's wondering, if you're observing the same individual male singing for 7+ days, how do you know that if you're seeing like the same individual or if you're seeing multiple males over the course of a week? Yeah,
that's definitely challenging, and I would say if you're not sure, then take the cautious approach, and you can observe some like higher level breeding evidence code if you're outside. Yeah, I would use the cautious approach, and it would depend on all sorts of circumstances. I mean, if it's a bird singing from the exact same tree for 7 days in a row, it's a pretty good chance it's the same bird. But yeah, be cautious about it for sure.
Okay. Lynn is asking if you report a bird exhibiting nest building and then it moves to a new location in a different square, do you need to change your previous report?
No, yeah, so yeah, you did observe that behavior on that first checklist, so leave it in there. None of the codes are to be taken as this bird was only nesting here. You know, it might change spots next year, same thing. So yeah, I would record that breeding evidence in both squares.
Okay, and then Sandra is asking, when do you start recording breeding evidence? Must we wait until we are in the actual safe date period? And this kind of comes up again in another question in terms of like wondering about breeding behavior sort of outside of safe dates and you know, how people should be reporting those observations.
Yeah, so if you're out of the safe dates, then you want to, there's nothing wrong with recording breeding evidence outside of the safe dates. You just want to make sure they're one of those higher level breeding evidence codes. So, you know, like that horned lark example, you know, we're out of the safe dates, but obviously they are nesting. There's a nest that has young in it, so pretty conclusive that the species is nesting. So it depends on the code. And that's why if it's something like singing or habitat, those codes we really don't want you to use outside of the safe dates because they could be a migrant just passing through doing that. But if it's a higher level code, for sure, go ahead and use it outside of the safe dates.
Great. Then I guess Christine is asking in relation to the charts that you were showing. So the breeding season is just the dark blue dates, or does it include the lighter blue shoulder season as well?
Yeah, so any part that's blue is the breeding season. The only difference between the light blue and the dark blue is the light blue breeding season overlaps with migration. So, you know, with the horned lark, we're in the breeding season, but there's still some of the migrants that are going to go breed on the Hudson Bay lowlands. They're still passing through. So there's a big overlap period for that species. But yeah, the whole blue period is breeding season.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. And then a question about the app and just whether it can be used outside of cellular or Wi-Fi range. So can you go out into the field and do a checklist and then wait until you're back within cellular range to submit those checklists?
Yeah, absolutely. It works great. You don't need to be in cell service. You do obviously to be able to submit the data, have either a Wi-Fi or a cell signal, but the GPS on your phone will help the app record where you are, and you'll be able to use it no problem in remote areas.
Okay, that's great. It's so handy to be able to do that when reception is unreliable in sort of more remote locations. All right, so many questions. It's really great to see. Someone is wondering about if they're surveying a square that's on the line of boreal shield and mixedwood plains. Can I see somewhere can I see somewhere where the square is designated as? Like, I guess they're kind of wondering about like the habitat designation in relation to their square, if it kind of falls between shield and mixedwood plains. Do you know the answer there to that one?
Yeah, so we purposely don't have that information available. It's again, goes back to this, the breeding dates are meant to be a guide. So it's not meant to be like a hard rule. These are meant to be a guide. And so if you're right on the border, it might make more sense to use the mixedwood plain. Think of it as sort of the average, the dates are sort of the average for the middle of that zone. So if you're at the border, it's probably going to be somewhere between the boreal shield dates and the mixedwood plain. And if you're really in doubt, then I would just take the cautious approach.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to approach it. So then Jean is wondering about is saying, I thought we could only use X within safe dates. And so referencing the Phoebe example. So that's obviously not.
Yeah, it's.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, the X is really meant to say there's no breeding evidence. So it doesn't make much difference whether you leave it blank or put an X.
Okay. Somebody's wondering about how to report. So if you see how to report a number of birds with an observation. So this question here is related to a mallard sighting with 6 ducklings and whether you report that as 1 bird or 7.
Yeah, you report the number of birds. So as long as they're not eggs, then you report the total.
Okay. Then there's Dennis is looking for a little bit more clarification for your 1 poll question around the difference between the Phoebe and the Warbler example. Warbler, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the Phoebe we're within their breeding season, whereas with the yellow rump warbler, we're not in their breeding season yet. So if you're in the breeding season, then and you have a territorial bird, then it's okay to go ahead and put that in. If it's a yellow rump warbler that's just hanging around for 7 days, but it's not the breeding season yet, then you don't want to put that in because it's highly unlikely. Or like it's just happens to be a migrant in your backyard 7 days.
Yeah, so just along that line, I mean, Claire's looking for more information about how to differentiate between singing and territory, those 2 codes.
Yeah, so I mean, basically territory code is when you've had a singing bird there for at least 7 days. That's pretty much different. So if you've got something that's singing and you want to upgrade it to probable breeding, you come back a week later and see if it's still singing there, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see, so many questions just coming in. So this is great to see that people seemed very engaged in your presentation and lots of follow-up, looking for lots of follow-up details. So this one person who lives in an urban area who sees a lot of red-winged blackbirds but no nests, and then they also are seeing red-tailed hawks. What code would that be if they're just sort of seeing these birds but not actually necessarily having any kind of confirmed breeding evidence, but they're, they regularly see them in and around the area that they live?
Yeah, well, so for red-winged blackbird, the easiest codes to use would be for observing it in suitable habitat. You want to make sure you're within the safe dates for it though. So you'd have to check that at this time of year, because we're not in like core atlasing season, you want to refer back to those. But if you see a male singing, then it's the S code. You could see a pair together. That's a common code to be used. Those are probably 3 most likely codes to be used, I would say, for most songbirds. For red-tailed hawk, H would be most likely code if you just observed it. Maybe you see a pair perched together in the breeding season, you could use P for the pair code. It really depends on the species though. Okay.
There's just so many questions. I don't think, unfortunately, we're going to be able to get to all of them just looking at the time. It's, yeah, our next session starts soon. So I think we're going to have to wrap things up. But thanks very much, Mike, for an informative presentation, and to everyone for the great questions so far. just a reminder that the next session is advanced atlasing. So if folks are interested in joining for that session, they're welcome to. And of course, many other sessions throughout the day and tomorrow as well. So thanks again for participating, and thanks to Mike.